love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same. Never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same. Will never be the same ever again.
Hello and welcome to SDAQ&A. I hope you had a great weekend. Today we are playing a rewatch of season 2 as we get these Des Ford Glacier View episodes up onto the public platform here at YouTube and beyond. Sorry for the delay in starting this morning. There's always something, isn't there? Facebook is playing games, and while we're going live elsewhere, Facebook wouldn't cooperate. So if you are watching on the Facebook group, hopefully you can. I've posted the link there. I might get Adrian, he's watching, I think, just to go and check that the link is working. And yeah. So yeah, welcome. And good to see everybody here in the comments there. Great. I hope you're enjoying life wherever you are, whatever time it is. And we're going to get started now with this interview with Dr. Rick Ferrét. And we'll be chatting about Glacier View, Des Ford. This was episode 18, season 2. So we're making our way through there. There's 86 altogether, and today and tomorrow we will do that. Some exciting news. Ron Kelly has agreed to come on the show, hopefully next week. Don McAdams also, Warren Trenchard will be coming, and I'm very much looking forward to that. But I was messaging Ron Kelly this morning, and my time, evening in the States, and yeah, he's sounds like a great guy, and I'm very much looking forward to having him on the show. One last thing before we start. This episode had some tech issues in the middle, and we had to stop and come back on. So I will have to have a break in about 50 minutes and put part 2 on. And I don't know how that's going to work, but we'll see what we can do. But anyway, here we are with Dr. Rick Ferrét, taking you back to 2020, around this time actually, 2020, 5 years ago. And I tell you what, as I've been watching these interviews, they are as refreshing as ever. It feels like we could be doing it live right now. And Rick, if you're watching, shoot me a message. Come and join us for a quick chat afterwards. Okay, crossing fingers everything works, and here we go. So those listening on the podcast, we're now going back in time. And those watching, yeah, also from 2025 back in time to 2020. Everyone, and welcome to another SDA Q&A podcast, and now also going live on our Facebook group, SDA Q&A. So those of you that are only listening to this for the first time on the podcast, you might want to go over and join our private group, the SDA Q&A private group, where you can watch the interviews live every week. At the moment, I think this week we'll have been doing 6. And we've been averaging about 4 a week, and then as ISO ends, we'll probably go back down to 1 or 2 a week, but there will be something live happening every week here in the group, so I'd love people to join. You can just search for us on Facebook. So my guest today is Rick Ferrét, Dr. Rick Ferrét. Can I call you Ricky?
Richard.
Richard.
Yeah, Rick's good.
Dr. Richard the First Ferrét.
Yes.
Hey, welcome to the show, Rick. It's good to have you here.
Glad to be here, Pete. It's all good.
You've been following a lot of the interviews, and our special focus in this series is looking back at Glacier View as a reflective, a retrospective, the highs and the lows, and it's been fascinating hearing everyone's different perspectives. Can you just put us in the frame a little bit for yourself? What kind of age were you in August 1980? Were you aware of what was going on with the Glacier View stuff? You and I know each other from the music industry and playing music together a lot, and I've always loved your music and laughing and jamming and doing. We've even done a couple of tours together, Rick.
Yeah.
And I remember often having some really interesting chats with you in the car as we travelled. So perhaps give us a little bit of background of you, your study, your education. I want to come specifically soon to a question we talked about with Ireland and with your living in the islands and matching culture to Adventism and beliefs and this kind of thing. But just for now, just give us a bit of a background on Rick Ferrét, where you came from, where you studied, what your thoughts were on Glacier View, and then we'll springboard into that the sociological perspective after.
Yeah, I'm basically a Wauchope boy, Pete, and those listening. Grew up there most of my life, Wauchope, Port Macquarie area, and started nursing at the Sydney Adventist Hospital in '76. Did my nursing training, met Jen there, and we were married in '79, right at the end of '79. December 23, the day after we were married. So this is 79 into 80. The day after we were married, we moved to Avondale, to Currumbong. That was the honeymoon. and started theology in 1980. So in terms of Glacier View and the discussions and that whole milieu of what was going on, I sort of landed at Avondale when that was really, I guess, at a peak time.
Yeah.
Certainly 79 was a peak year in terms of Des's discussion over in the US and that sort of thing. But Pete, I've got to say, I was a little green under the ears theologically, and I think for me, I was trying to accommodate coming out of nursing into another career, starting marriage and all that, and it's sort of, there was some around college who were really grabbing stuff and talking about stuff, and it was sort of, I'm trying to get my head into essays and that. So in a way, it bypassed me until some years later when I picked up my research tools and started looking back at that in hindsight, in retrospect. So it was quite an amazing time. It was full on. I can remember it. Have you heard this? Have you heard that? You know, it was like,
right.
It was like you want to buy a watch? You know, it was all happening. And I think in hindsight, it probably wasn't a bad thing that I didn't log in totally and understand it, because I think it allowed things to settle and then me to unpack it a bit later. That's just my view.
Yeah. Okay, that in some ways would have insulated you from making any knee-jerk reactions to it. You're focusing on your new studies, new career, new marriage, hearing all the stuff going on. So it was in your field of vision, so to speak. But yeah, it didn't kind of impact you enough to go, well, I'm out of here, or I'm going to make this stance. That's a good way of looking at it. You were able to kind of let it settle and then unpack it later. So when you say later, you're talking about the 90s?
Yeah, yes. In the mid-90s when I started a master's, but I do remember a number of my, it was just it was a friendly but a hostile context in a way. And when I think about some of my colleagues who I'm still very close friends with, who exited for a number of reasons, out of the class, out of theology, etc. And I think of the trauma and pain of that, and some would suggest, well, they just weren't tough enough, you know. I don't subscribe to that. I think there was a lot going on. And I also saw a couple of my lecturers leave, and they just had the most profound impact on my learning. That's still to this day.
So
very much so.
Who were some of those lecturers?
Well, the main one for me was Bernie Brinsmead.
Right.
Bernie took us into the Gospels, the life of John. And Pete, I still have you remember we didn't have computers then, it was handwritten notes. I still have my whole book of handwritten notes, nearly word for word. So I guess for me, that was a context that I couldn't understand. Those big discussions and torn relationships. And then we went into ministry, and a few years later we went into the island field. And all of these threads were starting to come a little bit undone for me in terms of what was going on. And I think Avondale may have been the start of those threads sort of unraveling, although I didn't understand it at the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Were you, so your years were 79 to 82, is that right? Your years at college? Are you still there? I think we might have... Are you still there, Rick? I think we might have lost Rick. Put your hand up if you can hear me, Rick. Not sure what's going on there. Sorry, viewers. We'll... Can you hear me, Rick? We can't hear you anymore.
I can see you.
Oh, there we go. We've got you back.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Could you hear me talking still then?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's good to know. If that happens again, I'll just tell you we can't hear you anymore.
Okay. I hope it's not this mobile data thing, Pete. We just don't have the internet in the new estate, so
Yeah.
I'm running it off mobile.
Yeah, that'll just mean that occasionally the bandwidth will get a bit overused in the area.
Okay.
That'll be right. We're at a good time of day for it. It shouldn't happen too often.
Yeah.
And we've got very patient viewers here.
Yeah.
They'll be fine. What I was wondering is, before I've got a question I want to ask you about culture and Christ.
Yeah.
To lead into some of what you kind of has become your life work in many ways. What you were there 79, 82?
80, 81, took a year off, 82, 83, 84, graduated. Yeah.
Right. And so that was kind of in the peak where a lot of ministers were leaving, I guess, that 83 to 86 kind of time period.
Yeah.
What was did you have an emotional reaction when you heard about Des Ford getting the boot? Was there an emotional kind of feeling of like, wow, that's big, or that hurts, or that's unfair, or what kind of thoughts were going through your mind just with regards to that?
Yeah, Pete, when I did my nursing, and by the way, if I had my way and I was still teaching at Avondale, I would just have all our ministers do 6 months of nursing. I just think the moving from room to room and the different people you are nursing and the different experiences that they come from, it puts you in a position of having to relate very quickly into different environments. And I think nursing helped me understand that relationships are very important in health and in healing, particularly emotional healing, not just physical healing, but also spiritual and emotional. And when I saw these things happening, whilst I wasn't understanding the intricacies of the theology, I was experiencing the fallout emotionally of friends and situations, and I was struggling how that works. It was like, why do we shoot our wounded? And for me, I think I took that, I'm saying that in hindsight now. At the time, I'm not sure I had that together in that perspective, but certainly hindsight allows you to reflect on that. So that a few years later, when things happened in the island field, those same questions were being asked, and it just started to grow too big. And I wasn't getting answers until a little bit later when I started an MA, which we could probably talk about a bit later, that just opened my mind up to a lot of different things. Yeah.
I want to come back a little bit to some of your friends leaving later. I want to talk about that a little bit later.
Yep.
But we've had a couple of texts between each other in the last week, and I think you phrased something really well that I wanted to kind of get you to unpack a bit more. Where you said to me it was your search in the islands to understand the mix of Christ and culture that stimulated your academic search. I thought that was a really interesting, would have been a very interesting moment for you.
Yeah.
And can you share some of your personal experiences there, and how that did start to form the narrative for your life, where you say it stimulated your academic search? But I like that word, the mixed of Christ and culture.
Yeah, some people will have read H. Richard Niebuhr's book, Christianity and Culture. Arthur Patrick put me in touch with that. It's a great read, but not for now. But Pete, maybe I could preface it very quickly. I don't want to take too much time with this. So whilst I'm explaining some of this, I see a presence of God through all this. It's not as if it's devoid of that, but that's probably why it made it such more of a struggle. If you can understand that, you know, it got to a point where I said, God, I'd rather you not. That would have been easier, I think, than God, I'll stick with you somehow through this. I mean, that became a big issue. But look, before we went to Pitcairn Island for 4 years, we were working in ministry in Gosford and Woy Woy churches, and I took a trip to Sydney. I was going to ride. I had a big 1100 Honda Super Boulder Door, beautiful bike, an ex-police bike, and it was raining, and so Jen said, "Why don't we go together in the old Ford XD?" So I'll abbreviate this. We went down. I had to see someone at the Sydney Adventist Hospital, but we parked in the Division parking lot. Some folk out there will know exactly what I'm talking about. Warunga Church on one side, the Division parking lot on the other. I took my son Anthony, which was probably the craziest thing to do because he was just absolute live wire at that stage. Little fella about, I don't know, 2. But Pete, I did what I did, and on the way back, I was in front of Warunga Church and stepped onto the road, and a voice said to me, "Rick, turn around and go into the Division and tell someone you want to do mission work." And I looked across at Jen and said, "What? I'm hearing things." So, and I was, but I just said, no. I got into the middle of Fox Valley Road, and the voice spoke again. Go into the Division and tell someone you want to do mission work. And I'm starting to get a little bit scared at this moment. And I get to the other side, on the Division side, and the voice said, "Stop, stop, go into the Division." I waved at Jen. I said, "I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on." And I went into the Division office. As I walked through the door, Dr. Arthur Furch, the late Dr. Arthur Furch, who'd been one of my lecturers, said, "Rick, you look a bit strange. What's going on?" I said, "I don't know. A voice has told me I need to go and talk to someone about mission work." Well, he took me straight around to Vern Palm. It was Section 1, Section 2 in those days. I ended up in Pastor Vern Palmetter's office. And Arthur said, "Vern, did you know that Rick and Jenny are nurses?" And he said, he's going through his database. No. So I'll cut it short. He said, "How interesting that Rick comes through right now." He said, "Half an hour ago, we had our 27th rejection of someone to go to Pitcairn Island. We didn't know Rick was a nurse, and to go to Pitcairn, the wife has to be a nurse at least. And we didn't have any of that data in here. And all of a sudden, Rick walks into the Division office and says, 'Hello, I want to do mission work.'" So, Pete, wind that forward now. We're on Pitcairn, and, you know, we had a couple of major accidents out there.
Yeah, there's some
my daughter over the cliff, and my wife went over the cliff after. Yeah.
Big trauma.
Massive trauma. And then we applied to go to Honduras. We wanted to do mission service in Honduras in 1980, 91, 92 at the end of Pitcairn. We did four years on Pitcairn, but the Division called us to Papua New Guinea. And while we're in Papua New Guinea, my son got burnt very badly in a fire.
Mm.
And I didn't realise what was going on in my experience at that time. But and excuse the words, but I called it, later on, I called it my Uncle Arthur Maxwell bedtime story experience. I'm just being face up honest with this. I was under the assumption, having to do 4 years of theology, I'd done it. But folks, this is where sometimes our theology and our experiences can get really in turmoil. I had the view that, God, you've called us out there, you'll look after us. And Pete, what really got me, what really tore me was, I was talking to God and saying, "God, you never asked me if my children could almost be killed or my wife could almost be killed. How could you do that?" And so I know some will say, "Rick, bad theology," but folks, that's the part of life. We navigate with our theology through it in our experiences together to make sense of life. And then when it happened to Anthony in Papua New Guinea, and we nearly lost him, and I was in Australia, and when Ashley fell over the cliff on Pitcairn, I was on the other side of the island. And you know what my thinking was? God, you're not there like I wasn't there as a father. bang, 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 bang.
Wow.
I think it was the deepest level I ever went to. When we finally came back home, and Anthony and Jen and Ashley and Bo, they came back on the plane. They got him out of Papua New Guinea, admitted Anthony to the Camperdown's Children's Hospital. I still remember standing there for hours, debriding our son's skin, dead skin off his body. And when Ashley went over the cliff, it was seeing her die. And you just think, ooh. And so I think God speaks to us in a crisis, but I think he also speaks in the calm times also. But for me, it was just building up, building up, building up, building up. And in Papua New Guinea, I had a couple of experiences where villages, Adventist villages, were involved in some big wars, tribal wars, about 6-7 people killed.
Wow.
And 2 of my district directors represented each of those villages. So Pete, and our listeners, just imagine what's going on here. The villagers said to them, unless you get each other, unless you fight each other, you're not one of us. Can you see? Yeah. And so we're sitting in ministers' meetings with these 2 gentlemen on each side of the room, and I'm saying to myself, is Christ bigger? Is grace deeper than culture? How do we minister in this situation where lives are being lost and these men are expected by their people to do damage?
Wow.
So we had to put them in other places in Papua New Guinea.
2 Adventist villages.
Yeah. Ministers. Yeah. Not entirely Adventist villages, but a lot of the folk were. Yeah.
And the two people who were told to go head to head were Adventist ministers.
They were my ministers under my care. Yeah. So that was one Pete, and then there was another one, and I'm getting a bit of rattled with all of this. I'm going, how is the gospel seen in this? And just one other, there's many, but one other, 2 if I can, really quickly, and just tell me to quieten down if I get too much of this. Pastor Jessley Faragasso, I was secretary. Pastor Jessley, lovely man, went to grade 6 primary and taught him how to use a computer. But the most beautiful soul, said to Jessley, I'll help you with the communication stuff and all that if you bring me in when we have moral issues so I can understand the nature of the cultural differences and that. And he said, absolutely. I remember we drove out to Homu. Homu may not mean much to many people that are listening, but that's where Peter Canopa was murdered. And we drove in there in the old 4-wheel drive, and Jesse said, I'll show you around the house. This is in 1992. And we went in, and Jesse said, just come around the corner of the house here and have a look at the wall. Pete, this is 1992. The blood was still on the wall.
Whoa. The
bullet holes were still in the some of the shrapnel had gone through the metal walls. And I said, Jessley, what's this? He said, the people will never wash that off. What? They protect it because it's the blood of a martyr in their eyes. Now, I know there's a lot of things went on, but I actually had to go and sit down for about an hour. And Jessley came and said, Rick, are you all right? And I said, no, I'm not. So this is all boiling up. And then I went up into the church to meet with the Homu folk. And there's Peter's Bible open to the last text he ever preached. And I'm going, God, what are you doing? What's going on here? Okay, one last little one. This, Pete, I hope I'm not taking too long.
No, this is fantastic. It helps to really convey what you're saying and what formed your interest that became a life work.
Yeah. I was searching for answers, not only for myself, but for what I thought was everything, the big picture stuff. I had an old man, Lapoon Strait. I got to talk Pidgin up there pretty quickly because you'd sometimes go out and take a service in some very remote places. I remember walking for a day and a half. We flew in by plane, walked for a day and a half for a village, and some of the old men said, "You're the first you're the first Adventist minister we've seen since Pastor Len Barnard."
Wow.
And it's just amazing. But anyway, the elders brought this old chief in, and we shoes off, sat on the floor with him, and the men sat around in a circle. The old chief couldn't speak English. He couldn't speak Pidgin. He could only speak his talk place. And so they translated, and they said, Pastor, our chief wants to become an Adventist and his whole village.
Wow.
And in my Western individualized way, I'm thinking, hang on a minute, we got to study one by, we've got to do this, we've got to study one by one. They've all got to make the decision. And it was rumbling through me. This is not how things are done in different places. So my whole cultural shift is taking place. But he has 6 wives.
Right.
And a number of children. And Pete, I'm thinking, this is a dilemma. This is a moral dilemma. There's a theological issue at stake here. What do we do? And in the end, I knew. And Ted Wilson's father actually did a fair bit of study on multiple marriages and that in other cultures. But I knew if that man went and got rid of 5 of his wives, and the social dislocation that would have caused, how could I stand and say, here's the gospel, brother? You know, I've just helped destroy your family. So, Pete, in the end, my view was let the Holy Spirit lead you here. Now, some may say, Rick, you should have thrown the book. I couldn't do that. And so I say that because that was the dilemma of stuff I was facing. And, Pete, one I only said 2, but another short one. I thought I was up there doing God's will, you know. Well, I was. But I was up there for 4 years. I went up into a little place up in the Highlands. It was a Catholic monastery, in a sense. Sister Baines had been there for 45 years. I just knelt in humility and said, Rick, don't think you're doing showy stuff here, mate. I said to her, are you going to, she said, I'll die here because these are my people. She was from America.
Wow.
And Pete, I said, so what are you doing? She says, I'm building little hospices beside the villages for the dead to die with some respect. I said, what do you mean? She said, they're being thrown out of their villages like the lepers in the Old and New Testament because of HIV, and the folk don't know what to do with them. So I said, so what are you doing? This is a Catholic nun, head of a monastery, in trouble with her church, in trouble with the Pope. She said, Rick, I've taught my nuns to take the little scrolls and pin them up on the trees in the villages and teach the villagers how to wear condoms. Are you grabbing this?
Yeah.
And my mind's going, where's Christ? What's going on here? And then she ordered boxes of them to be airlifted and dropped into villages from the sky. and it sounds so funny, but in a way, it raised questions that I always just say, that same question. How do I understand the gospel in another place, in another time almost? And I just wasn't getting answers where I was sitting.
And how to fit your, or the company, not company, but the church you represent, how to fit that culture in an existing culture, how to bring Christ out in that culture without disrespecting people's stories, journeys, where they've come from.
Yeah.
And the powerful social connections and interactions that are represented by culture as well. It could come in and cause way more damage going, okay, sorry, get rid of those 5 wives, you know. What do you mean, condoms? Come on, stop that.
Yeah.
You could cause way more damage with that. And
Pete, it's certainly, there's no disrespect to my forebears. I have the utmost appreciation for the groundwork that all of the folk have done. I mean, they've gone with the commission like Paul, you know, go out there. And I guess the other part that for me was, when I go to somewhere else, I'm from culture A, and I go into another culture, it's almost impossible for me to divorce, and I can't divorce my own cultural playing out in the new environment. But I was learning very quickly that I had to start to navigate those spaces and understand primarily what another culture meant, rather than being bombastic and saying, I've got this stuff for you now. So it shifted my thinking in that process, and I started seeing that there are many ways to understand the things of God, many ways. And so for me, it was a big shift.
And also, if you're looking at the conflict at Glacier View,
around going on, percolating, the ramifications of it percolating underneath, when you're dealing with two Adventist pastors being instructed by their villagers to fight and potentially kill each other, that kind of puts the other stuff, it doesn't diminish it, but it puts it aside for you, because these are immediate things that you have to deal with right there on the ground that are huge.
Yeah. And Pete, one of the things that we'll probably come to, but I can put it out there now, is theology is not the only measure of our identity. And I'll unpack that. If it is, and, you know, I guess some will want to correct me on this, but I think I've done enough to have a look at this. If it is, then we can slay each other. But if there are other things that are really important also, then we need to be very careful in the way we relate and the way how we carry our manners and what we do as a community. I'm just throwing it out there now because I just saw, we've all seen things. And so that was what got my journey going. Pete, when we came back to Australia because of the accidents, I need to finish that little story just so I can launch into the academic side, I guess. We were stationed in the mission hostels down in Wahroonga. Most people will know that. I don't think they exist anymore.
Yeah.
I was connected with the old WAC in those days. Wahroonga
Activity Centre.
Yep. I was up preaching one day and I was falling apart. It was too soon. Nearly lost my daughter, my wife, and my eldest son. And still didn't know how it would all work out. And so I'm up preaching, trying to hold it together. And a couple of the chaplains were in there, and I don't think they'll mind if I mention their names. It was Roger Hanley and Roger Vince, two very good friends. And they saw that I was in turmoil, and they said after the service, "How are you going, Rick? What's happening?" They could pick it up. They were chaplain. They understood the dynamics.
Yes.
We got talking, and they said, "Hey, we do have a men's group, a prayer group. And you're more than welcome to just come and share what you want, or you don't have to share it all. Just be a part of who we are." Pete, it was the best thing I did. I think it saved my sanity in a lot of ways. But during one of those, it was hard. I got suicidal. I really did. I had to get help. I wasn't putting it all together. And I got treatment and I got help. I'm laying it out there now, but that's where I was. I don't think anyone gets offended with that. It's just sometimes we have a view of ministers or teachers as having all this stuff together. Well, when we're out in front of the pulpit at times, or behind the curtain, or in front of the curtain, we can be quite different people than we are behind it. And so it's not that we're meaning to be double standard. It's just that we're trying to protect, but we need to live in our own skin. And I think.
And you are dealing with huge things.
Yeah.
Huge things.
Yeah. So we're in a prayer, and I'm quite angry with God still because I hadn't worked it out. You remember when I walked across the road to Wahroonga, the voice stopped? The voice spoke again.
Wow.
And we're talking now 4 or 5 years later. And I was very angry with God. How dare you allow my children to be touched? Where were you? And Pete, I still remember the words. I'm quite angry, and I'm shouting at God. And the words were this, and this was God the Father speaking. When your daughter went over the cliff, and when your wife went to get her and fell also, and when your son was burnt in the fires of Papua New Guinea, I was right there with them like I was with my son on the cross. I'm not kidding to anyone. I don't tell that story that often because it's just still after 30 years, bang, bang, bang.
Yeah, powerful.
And it started me on a journey. And Pete, what I had to go back home and do in my own mind was say, God, I've got to let you go so that you come back big enough so that I can't control you anymore. I needed to control God. God was saying, Rick, you can't. But if you stay with me, I've always promised, and I learnt later, and I had it mixed up, that God always says to us, I won't necessarily stop the things from happening, but I can guarantee I'll be with you when they do. And I guess, Pete, now when we view with the cancers and all this later stuff that's come along, there's so many times I wished I could kick all this out, but there's something in the back of me that says God's bigger than all of us. God's bigger than all of us. Just stay close enough in whatever realm you stay to hear what he wants to say. That's, Pete, it's almost if I'm scared to walk away from that now because of what's happened before. And that got me energized then to ask more questions and seek more answers. But it was that experience over 5 years that probably I would have left the ministry. I was gone. Yeah.
That's incredible, mate. I only knew the kind of the edges, the fringes of those stories. I guessed at how difficult it was, but I really appreciate you sharing your heart there. And I think part of community is feeling that you are able to do that without judgment.
Yeah. And I guess, Pete, and moving into another area is, you know, I really enjoy, it's like a sociology bulwark in the last few days. There's no layout on tomorrow. I've got to say I've appreciated all the ones I've been able to look at. And good friend Rob Wolfgram, really enjoyed that. It was Rob's research, Pete, that opened up some material for me to get a handle and push me further. It was Rob's masters. I might have mentioned it on a tweet the other day.
Yes, yeah.
And I would encourage people to read that sort of material. It allows you to get a bigger picture. Look, theology is massively important to me, but it's not the only view or the only lens by which we see life. Psychology helps us as much as people don't like that. Anthropology is so important, sociology. And when we can get our creative minds together with theology right in there, but the other angles looking, people get scared and run from that. I don't, because we've got nothing to fear from that.
Yeah. In fact, when I'd finished the interview with Bob, I thought, and you and I have had chats about this as well, I thought, I don't think there's enough of that kind of discussion going on, because it helps to explain why humans behave the way they do if they're put into certain systems and structures and cultures, and I think would really help bring understanding to situations and perhaps even stop or stave off some of the train wrecks.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of I know the churches sort of have embraced counsellors and psychologists, but have they embraced sociological research, and have they got people they can call on? You know, like, wouldn't it be great if you're at the SPD or one of the unions or the GC, and you can say, look, this is the problem going on. Let's chat to Bob. Let's chat to Rick. Let's look at some ramifications here from a sociological, anthropological perspective. Is there any kind of place for that? Is that kind of thing happen at all?
Not really, but I guess I've been a bit biased with my teaching at Avondale, where I've tried to, simply because I think the more lenses we can view ourselves with in tangible time gives us a better insight to how we think, feel, react in all of those ways with each other. And Pete, I didn't understand the dynamics of organisation and the frailty of organisation and the craziness of organisation, but also the need for organisation until I went on this search.
Yes.
So I was a little bit limited and a bit naive. I thought, well, this is God's work. Nothing can come undone.
Yeah.
Yes, in a way, that's the ideal. But the
Big
reality is God is happy to work with us nuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that creates a lot of tension.
Yeah, yeah.
And we can talk about that, but it was Rob's work, and the same Max Weber, the same sociologist that he kicked off with him delegitimation of charisma, and he talked about that, so I don't need to go back through that. I went in another direction and looked at charismatic routinization, which is a big sociological word, which basically means what happens with the influence of a prophet when the prophet lays down their tools or is gone.
Wow.
So
unpack that for us.
Does charisma keep going, or is it handed on, or how does it happen?
Yeah, tell us. That's fascinating.
Yeah, well, the notion of charisma, we've all said it. We're not talking about a religious movement here like charismatic church. It's a sociological term. I mean, Pete, could you think of a musician that you would say, boy, that musician had charisma?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think we all could. I mean, I'm thinking of Bob Marley or someone, you know,
Yeah.
or Elvis.
Yeah.
Now, they're still human, but in the religious sense, a person who has charisma doesn't self-design it. It's given to them by community and the divine, but the community respects that. In Ellen White's case, what differentiated Ellen White from her husband James or from Joseph Bates, Ellen White was given dreams or visions, or however you want to coin that terminology. So when she spoke in terms of I saw, the people were taken into the divine realm, and she gained credibility through that. You get what I see?
Yeah.
See what I'm saying? That's the notion of charisma.
Yep.
But it can't last forever. So there's got to be more miracles, and it's just got to keep that edge. What often happens is the charisma is not diluted, but it's remanaged or refactored into institutions.
Right.
Now, let me explain that a bit, because mate, there's books written on this, and I'm trying to just unpack it very quickly.
Yeah.
So, can you remember? Oh, you may not remember. Some folks. Ellen said to James, the Lord has showed me that we need to make a little publication to the little flock, a word to the little flock.
I do remember that.
That's a vision. Let's call it a vision. A little later, Ellen and James had been to the home on the hill, the health program. Didn't quite like the total thing. Ellen comes back and says, James, I think we need our own hospitals. Just hold that for a sec. Publishing, hospitals. A little bit later, James and others, I think we need to create our own educational institutions. Have you got where I'm going?
Mm.
Okay. As long as Ellen just held those up there, they were just dreams.
Yeah.
As soon as she said and brought them into the tangible, that is the you and me,
Yeah.
concrete forms were started to be built. Oh, how do we do that? Structures started to be developed. So what do we end up with? Publishing houses, massive hospitals, massive schools.
Mm.
So that was her charisma being fed through the institutions.
Mm.
What that means is that from an Adventist perspective, I guess, the work of God through Ellen was then filtered through institutions in the human sphere. The divine was brought to the human, and then you had this massive tension. While it was still in her mind, it was creating stuff. Once it was put into forms, institutions and organisations, you had structures and forms being developed, and you needed them. You needed them to exist.
Yeah.
But here's the
That's
thing.
when you get the politics and
And they fight against each other.
Yeah.
If you go to the day of Pentecost, you remember how many were baptised in a day? And everyone's going, yeah, how good's that? Okay, that is wonderful. But as soon as someone says, what are we going to do with these people?
Yeah.
You have just created the first signs of structure and organisation. Well, what do we do with these 3,500 people? You get where I'm drifting here?
Yeah.
So a lot of my friends have said, Rick, the church is useless. Oh, I'm going to go and start a new one. I say, please come and tell me what you've done. You know why there's more than one Adventist church in a town? Because there's too much tension with one and they have to build another one.
Yeah.
Oftentimes.
Yeah.
That's been a bit facetious. But Pete, that's
true.
Yeah. That's the point, is that the institutions have I probably can't find it now. For religious movements that want to exist beyond the first generation, they have to build institutions. They have to build forms and structures. The tragedy of that is that those forms and structures fight against the original charisma and creativity of what the original pioneers were thinking. And that has been our history, but not only ours, but every other movement I know of. And it creates these incredible tensions. What's built into that is creedal statements. Just tell me if I'm saying too much.
No, it's great.
When the Millerite call went out, come out of her, my people, come out of Babylon, that was the big call that basically separated people from their churches. Up until that, the Millerite movement could coexist with the Methodists or the Congregationalists. Then the dividing line was put in there. Okay, come out of her, my people. After the here's another one. You're getting me going now.
I like it. It's good. This is great stuff.
What does a person do? I read. Oh dear, I was thinking of his name. Cognitive dissonance. Festinger. Someone will help me. The theory of cognitive dissonance. What would we have done on October 25, 1844? At 1 minute past midnight.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
The Lord's coming. The Lord's coming.
It's natural. It's natural to kind of try and work out cognitively what happened to allay dissonance, but ironically cause it.
You've got it totally. And of course, much of the religious world and the rest of the world said, well, Festinger did. His first chapter was on the Millerite movement.
Right.
His introductory chapter was on the Millerite movement. Is basically his summation or conclusion was the Millerite movement to continue had to rationalize away their mistakes. Get it?
Yes.
Because all their eggs were broken.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder. And I'm just doing some research with Ellen White's notion of persecution, maltreatment to the Adventists during their journey. And Pete, I sometimes wonder in my own skin, coming from a minister and a teacher and administrator, I sometimes wonder, in some of our discussions, are we still psychologically suffering from the disappointment? It's almost as if we've got to say to God through our history, God, are we still okay? We made a big blue. I
think that's a very fascinating and credible thing you're saying, because not only is Adventism unique, Adventism isn't unique in that these problems happen in all systems, but what gives it a little bit more energy to keep this momentum going as if it's back then is the constant thinking Jesus is coming any day. So it creates a sense psychologically where these systemic things keep playing out as if it just happened because he's coming very soon. I think you might have...
So that's where I lose Rick again, but we're gonna we kept going, and I saved it as a different file, and I can only do this in real time. So you're gonna have to just bear with me, and again, it's great to see you all and see you all watching the program. And you'll see a bit of tech stuff coming up on the screen now as we go to part 2 of this very fascinating conversation. Rick pretty much looks at things from a anthropological, sociological perspective, and that really helps to kind of look at the things. I personally feel like it's okay to let go of systems and not try and save them sometimes. It's not rocket science living a life. We have wiring within us, God-given wiring that helps our conscience move to the fore. As humans, we are flawed and we do bad things, but I think there's a striving there to try and be honourable and better people. And I don't think there's anything wrong with letting go of systems. We don't have to keep big things going. As I've often said, I love cafe culture, which just means hanging out with a couple of people, feeling the sun on your face and the gentle breeze on your back if you've got a nice climate. It's not rocket science to live a joyous life in community, but always being mindful of these sociological, anthropological, human conditions that permeate and complicate our lives no matter what. So I think living a successful life with friends and community is often about shedding some of this stuff, but being mindful of the sociological templates and implications. There's a lot of effort, I think, people put into justifying Adventism's existence. And yeah, I think it's good that they've got the hospitals, and there's lots of great things that they do, ADRA and things we've mentioned. But, no one could ever mention Ellen White again from today forward, and the world wouldn't change. We wouldn't be worse off. There'd be other inspiring people to point us in the right direction. People say, oh, but Ellen guided me to the Bible. Well, if there was no Ellen, some inspiring person would guide you where you needed to go. Anyway, let's get on with the program. And as I said, I have to do this in real time. So no doubt you're seeing on the screen my master hard drive. I don't know what you're seeing actually, but I'm just having to find part 2 of this incredible interview with Dr. Rick Ferrét. He's a local guy. I met him mainly because he's a very talented musician. And he and I, in the early days, did a lot of music together. But he's also a very smart individual. He's retired now. He lives about 30 minutes away from where I live. And he's written some books. He's got a really good book. Oh, is it on Butler? The famous Adventist president of many years ago. I did an interview with him on that. I'm pretty sure it's that book. And once again, I'm just prattling. Apologies as I find part 2. Here we go. Got no idea how it begins. Let's see. I think this is me of 5 years ago trying to work out what on earth is going on. And it's young Pete over there. How you going, young me? Where do I look? Did you know back then that SDAQ&A was going to continue on for 5 years, 400 or so interviews later? It's weird, isn't it? So anyway, I'm watching myself there trying to reconnect with Rick. And let's see, I might try and put it forward.
Hey!
We're back.
Oh my goodness. Hey, we'll quickly go straight back
So,
to the room.
Let's get into it. Enjoy.
And I'll explain what happened then.
All good.
We're back to 2020 now, those who are listening to the podcast.
And I think I remember what I was saying.
I don't.
It was a good point. Sorry about this.
Clearly, someone doesn't want this discussion.
It's everyone that doesn't like the barn night. They're good at computers. They hacked into my computer, and hang on. Hang on. I just can't do two things at once. All of that. And hopefully it didn't wipe what we've done. If we have, I've got interview starting again now. A new post.
2025 me. Get on with it, 2020 Pete. Come on.
Well, that hasn't happened.
Stop
Someone
mucking
doesn't want to
about.
hear your...
No.
But hopefully the good thing is I recorded it. We've got people joining back again. Guys for the unexpected crashing of my Wi-Fi. The power in my house off there, and we're going to get that momentum back. One thing that you were just finishing on there was that you wonder if we're still locked into this end time feeling of the disappointment is still there. And I was saying in reply to that, as a way to kind of validate what you're saying, is I think not only are we still there, but we're possibly still there because of this the mission, the teaching, the doctrine of the Christ coming very soon. So if we're constantly thinking that Jesus is coming very soon, then of course we will be stuck back in the great disappointment. And I think you were about to kind of talk about, because we're stuck there, we're stuck in the early stages of a sociological kind of system that's not breaking away and growing, perhaps.
Yeah, look, for me, one of the challenges was this dual imperative, and if I use the word sectarian, it's not in a negative connotation. It's a sociological discussion. A sectarian movement is one that hives off from the mainstream and retains some of those basic elements, but has unique ones to itself.
Right.
If you look at a cultic movement, it has no relationship with the original. It's totally outside of that realm. So that's a really crude way of putting it. But so the dilemma for Adventism was they had this the dual paradigm or preach the imminent return of Jesus. Yeah.
Yes. But
at the same time, occupy till I come. Okay. And they have gone in parallel shape all the way through. Now, Adventism developed institutions on the basis of Ellen White's counsel to promote the proclamation of the imminent end of time. Pete, can I just share a couple of quotes here?
Yeah.
In 6 Testimonies 224, Ellen says, as our work has extended and institutions have multiplied, God's purpose in their establishment remains the same. The conditions of prosperity are unchanged. Come forward 100 and something years, and George Knight makes an interesting comment. There's a sense of there is a definite sense in which failure was built into the very success of the young denomination. That is, this is it. In order to preserve the message of the soon coming of Christ, institutions based on continuity and semi-permanence had to be erected so that the message would continue. You get the point?
Right, yeah.
Okay. And
so they're continuing, but they're stuck.
In the process, subtle and not so subtle transformations took place. By the end of the 19th century, many Adventists were saying, hang on, our pioneers wouldn't recognise us.
Mm.
Now, I don't see that as a bad thing. The challenge is that as Adventism is institutionalised, its roots have gone deep into society. What aggravates me a lot is we'll talk about a theology, but never talk about the deepness in society that our institutions have created.
Yeah.
Now, that creates a tension. So while we're wanting to preach the imminent Advent, we look as though we're doing pretty well down in the world anyway.
Yeah.
But here's the option. What other choice did we have? Either close down after the disappointment or bear with the tension. I've come to the conclusion I don't think we'll ever release ourselves from the tension, but we need a maturity in every generation to tackle the tension. I don't see us tackling the tension too well.
And I think, and I would agree that that's probably what's going to happen. And in fact, it's a natural thing. It happens in all systems. It would be a good thing. But if we could have a thread of understanding from a sociological perspective, then each new generation that comes to it doesn't have to kind of fall in love and embrace a certain aspect of Adventism only to have it challenged, torn down, told that it's wrong, and see another schism as if to them it's for the first time. Like we were talking before about the how wonderful it would be if we could have a sociological department officially running in every conference office, union and division and at the GC, because that would keep the thread of this understanding going on and take the shock horror, oh, this is happening.
Sorry, go ahead.
Is it possible, because you're sort of saying, you know, if the church split, that the new lot would have these problems exactly the same before long.
Yeah.
Does Adventism have a unique kind of distinctive looping mechanism, though, that other systems eventually kind of fade out and just, like the tension within Adventism every 30 or 40 years seems to be quite gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
Whereas most other systems kind of just seem to gradually flow, ebb, adjust, grow, swing left to right. Ours is a loop, and I've seen the loop in my lifetime. So imagine people that are you know, generationally following this. What can be done to kind of break that loop? And does Adventism have a slightly worse situation, or does it manifest a slightly worse outcome than other systems from a sociological perspective?
Yeah, one of the challenges, and it's still a hot debate at the moment, one of the challenges for sectarian movements is, do they maintain their sectarianism? We could talk about the Amish, different movements. How do they maintain their sectarianism in the face of, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church particularly has unique issues confronting it. How does a movement that preaches the imminent return for 100 or 200 years, and it's not the first to do that, it's been taught since the times of Christ, how does a movement continue to do that at the same time as have to exist in occupying?
And does that also create this tension at a higher level than most?
Yeah, and I call it an apocalyptic itch, like an apocalyptic itch. And what we often see is the Lord should have come by now, because we've preached it and we've preached it and we've preached it. And oftentimes we'll look back at ourselves and say, God, we're not good enough, are we? You should have come by now. And so what we tend to do again is retreat into the theological realm and point fingers and say, who's to blame?
Yeah.
If we only had all this truth right, then it'd all be finished by now.
And even Ellen White said that.
Exactly. And that is another discussion at another time, that whole, I would love to talk about revelation inspiration stuff, and others would too and could.
Yeah.
But Pete, so Adventism is a premillennialist, apocalyptic, sectarian movement that has been diluted in the sense of its association with society. The biggest part of that dilution, and that doesn't mean, to me, dilution doesn't mean bad. The biggest interface of Adventism with society now is our medical and educational institutions, particularly our medical institutions. So it's really interesting. One argument is that Adventism is going through the medicalisation process, which really brings it into, when we first started out as a movement, I remember George Storr's writing, we will never have a creed. We will never have a creed. Why? As soon as we raise it up, we'll judge people by it. Well, what does a movement do in terms of longevity to say this is who we are? It's going to formulate, whatever the semantics we use, it's going to say this is what we believe. This is what we believe become concretized. They become forms, and then we have inquisitions, and those processes take place. Pete, my bottom line is, I argued when I did my research, was we cannot alone say theology is the only way we identify ourselves. What we do in this life we live in terms of our institutionalization and organization, is actually a big part of who we are. So I said our identity is formed by not only what we articulate, say we are, but what we incarnate, what we do. And those two are often in tension. So when I hear my church, which I love, saying, this is who we are in one realm, but not leaning across and saying, well, actually, we're in the other, and how does that work? Because that's harder stuff over there to deal with. So people will often retreat and say the church is not like it was.
Yeah, okay.
And let's go back to a golden era. Honestly, in my research, I've never found that era.
No.
If we understood what the pioneers went through, we would just kneel down and just say, God help us, because it wasn't an easy road by any shape or means. But for me, here's the challenge for me. Every generation has to be able to ignite its own flame. We live from the past. It's like she said, if we don't understand the past, where do we go in the present and the future? But we can't be constrained. And if I can read something to you, I think this might clarify it better than I could probably say it. I wrote this a few years ago. Bear with me if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's great. And what can you just hold up the cover of your book so we can just see the title and stuff?
Oh, look at that picture, mate.
Oh, it looks good.
Yeah. And Pete, Pete, for any of our viewers, this is they're not producing it again now, so it's a few years old. Look, I'm happy for people to message me, and I'll send them electronic files of the book.
That'd be great. That'd be fantastic. Yeah, fantastic.
Pete, this summarises for me the situation, if I could. A chap by the name of Gustafsson summarised the continuous paradox of the religious institution. Am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay. When he declared that the religious vessel, the religious church, well, I'll put it in that term, provides a structure that wants to grasp, maintain, and provide form for its treasured oils. However, any vessel is by definition restrictive. New wine, old wineskin sort of paradigm.
That's great.
Thus, the same form that seeks to protect and preserve likewise imprisons and imperils. There's the tension. Yep. So the words religious institution are a contradiction of terms almost. How can religion, which deals with the sacred, the divine, the transcendent and beyond, be put into ordered human concrete systems and not suffer dislocation?
Yeah.
And neither reformation nor renewal comes easily, since religious institutions and organisations exist to provide stability. There's the rub.
Yeah.
So the creative minds, Pete, here it is. Why do we have educational? And when Ellen White said, let's build schools, she opened the can of worms. She said, don't be mere reflectors of others, think for yourselves. We didn't know what she was saying. The education system wants to undo the gate and let the theories run through. Churches by nature and organisations by nature want to close the gate because we've worked out where it's going. Always. So oftentimes in Adventism and other movements, you'll hear the hitting of educational institutions. If they only preach the right thing at Avondale, they'd get it all right. You know, those sort of scenarios.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay, we can learn, but that's what education does. It teaches you, and that gate was opened many, many years ago, and it propelled Adventism into the world, which our pioneers would never have thought could ever happen, because the Lord was going to come before all that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, and boy, you have articulated so succinctly what's going on. This is why I think this is kind of what you and Bob Wolfgram have opened and made aware to us is so important, because all of a sudden, so two things I want to say. All of a sudden, first of all, you look back at Glacier View,
and
you go, okay, well, look, perhaps we don't have to demonise your Parmenters and your Tolhursts, because they were part of a system that almost anybody that held their title was going to do what they did because of the way the system works, the way the whole process of this kind of that all institutions are facing. People reacted predictably almost. So that's one thing that helps to, I think, take a bit of the sting out of some of it and can help maybe with a bit of the healing. That doesn't exonerate anyone from doing
No.
anything bad, but it just puts it better in the frame a bit better. But secondly, I want to know, does Adventism seem to do this on a ramped up, a highly intense situation in other systems? And secondly, what can be done about this? Because wouldn't it be great to actually come up to something that can help bring about some kind of resolution?
Yeah. Look, that paradox, Pete, will always be present
In every system.
In every system. And one of the things I learned was this is just where I landed, is I think it was that understanding that helped me stay within religion in total, because I was ready to opt out of all sorts of things, because I couldn't. And I just think I was led in. Look, sociology is not the end all and be all. It's just one of the disciplines that helps us understand.
But it's a discipline that the church isn't looking at.
No.
They could use it as one tool that's not being used at all.
Arthur Patrick, and I love that man. Just on another tangent, very briefly, Pete, there were three men in my life, and I call them mentors, even though we didn't spend a lot of time together. I certainly did with Arthur, because he helped supervise my doctoral work. Des Ford, Morris Venden, and Arthur Patrick. And to me, some of the finest Christian gentlemen experientially. They helped me see the gospel experientially. And I was looking at it theologically, and in a way, this is where Ellen sits for me, experience this stuff. So we will get into our little bun fights about a pure theology and lose ourselves in that process. So I'm about creating context, and there's so many times I think this will never work. And I think what you're doing here is helping a little bit of that process. Is I don't mind conflict, Pete. It's what we do with ourselves in that space. And I'm reminded of that term again that Ellen used, a loving and lovable Christian is some of the greatest evidences to God. Well, that is a theological discussion in its own right. So a loving and lovable Christian means we have the ability to sit down rather than tear up. So I want our young people to be able to dialogue in the world in which they have their being and look at where we've been, but talk about those things so they're constructive, and maybe they'll look at them quite differently than we will, and we can say we can walk with this.
Yeah, exactly. So just what can be done, because so many people want what you're saying. There's so many people that want to go, yep, we accept that you have a different opinion, that I have a different opinion. Let's try and walk. Who's responsible for trying to at least try and create this?
Well, Pete, for me,
where does the responsibility lie?
Yeah, I think it comes back to us, Pete.
You and I want it, but it doesn't seem to be being implemented.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I guess people say, well, we've tried. My circle of influence is very small, and I'm just where I worship. I've sort of restricted myself to that place now, saying, where does God want me to work here with these sort of ideas? Let's meet with people. Let's discuss around the home. And I've gone from throwing it big, let it catch on.
Yeah.
And Pete, am I pessimistic? Well, human nature tells me a little bit I am, but I also know God's big enough. And so I sometimes wish he'd slap me around and say, get out of all this.
Yeah.
But it's just, keep working with it.
But I think even if you keep working with it within it, like you and I, we've come to different conclusions. We're still mates. We still enjoy hanging out, having food together. I'm thinking it from a viewpoint of not what a lot of people have come to terms with, but in a sense of future generations of young people. I had a fascinating discussion with a couple of young people this morning, and they feel very torn because on the one side they'll have quite a charismatic conservative leader come to their church and they feel like yep, this is the way we should go. Next minute they have a very liberal charismatic leader coming and no, sorry, it was this way I should have gone. And they're very confused because there doesn't seem to be someone at the helm kind of saying publicly that, look, yeah, we've got all our problems, we've got this history, we've come, even if they understood the sociological background of it, there's no one really saying, you are welcome here. There just seems to be silence. I'm trying to work out who's responsible when you look at an organisation, sociologically speaking, other organisations, do other organisations that come to this, have there been any that have successfully at least got it a little bit under control?
Pete,
just for the sake of the kids.
Oh, yeah. Pete, just let me hang on that one, but go back one prior to that if I can. When we talk about community, how valuable is community? A theology can move in its own realm and not need a society or an ecclesiology, a body to undergird it. It can just become strict theology. And we can argue about that all day and say that's what defines us. I don't believe that. None of us have found anything of value. Very few of us, I would argue, very few of us have ever stood up on a rock and said, I know it now. Mm. We've all been socialised in an environment that has helped us understand the big pictures in life. And those mentors that is, you've got mentors, I've got mentors, all of our listeners have mentors. Pete, I would say where I go is I've got to stay within a community because that is where I find ourselves in real time and our real being able to talk. I would love it for the organisation at every level to be able to get that together, but I know too much now. And look, I'm not being brash here.
No, we're speaking not about Adventism, but across systemic. This is a system problem.
And people will say, well, the Holy Spirit's not. Yes, the Holy Spirit is there, but it's working with foible humans. Yeah. And the nature of organisation is such that we do become self-sufficient and we do become George and I talked about it. We could become the ultimate end contradiction. A movement that was brought into existence to preach the second advent, but has become so comfortable in the world and so deep down in the soil that we've lost sight of what that means. And that's a contradiction. So, Pete, going back to the second part, we've just got to find the value of community. I don't know that when I was raised as a child, had some lovely sort of stuff happening, but it was never worked on how valuable is our religious community family in terms of who we are as a people. Now, my family can tolerate a fair few things. Let's do it with our church. You know, let's do it. Rick Rice, I don't know, I think most people would know Rick Rice. He wrote a book, and Rick was one of my examiners. Pete, that's another area. When we did our masters, it was with some great friends at the Gilbert Kansis, the Mel Lemkes, the Nick, the youth director names, and plenty of names.
Nick Ross.
Nick, yeah. Neil Thompson, it just goes on. Bronnie was there. There was just a number of us involved in that. And Barry Gain got that together with the La Sierra School of Religion faculty. This was a turning point in my whole life. I was working in Papua New Guinea. I was struggling with this stuff. Christ culture. We sat and listened to the likes of the late Bailey Gillespie, Dr. Richard Rice, Professor Rice, Paul Landers, John Jones. And we would go home when we're staying in the dorms down here at Avondale. You know, we're mature people out there in ministry, and we would just get together and say, these guys are opening something that we haven't understood before in a graciousness. A graciousness. But the man that was stood above all for me was Charles Teal. And Charles Teal was a sociologist, the late Charles Teal. And it was he that said, as a movement, we are more than what we say we are. We are what we incarnate as a movement. So, Pete, what that means for me is, as a movement, we are social creatures, social beings who have emotions, who have, you know, all of those sort of things. Why does theology become the only measuring rod when there's much more to it than that.
Mm.
And so my argument is, let your theology be discussed in a healthy environment. But what sectarian movements tend to do, particularly an Adventist movement, is not tolerate that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. It's brilliant. It's great. And I think the responsibility lies somewhere for that to happen. Yes, with you and I. But one of the things I loved, and I think it's done across the board, but the North New South Wales Conference Office has a person that their job is to oversee and check on all the other ministers in the North New South Wales Conference. It's probably done everywhere.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wouldn't that be great if they had another person there that looked after all the musicians all around the conference office, or someone that looked after all the, like, find all your little subgroups and little communities. Because what I'm seeing happening now is what happened to my generation. I wasn't quite a baby boomer, but I wasn't quite the Gen X, I think, were the ones younger than me. We literally were let through the gap. I'm not complaining, not a victim. I ended up getting up and doing everything I possibly could to make my life as good as it was. But we literally were a small but ignored generation. Because the leadership was not, they were doing what you're saying. They were focusing on this kind of battle of theology going on and standards and all this kind of stuff. If there's people watching that have power way beyond you and I, maybe they could take that on board. Because what's happening right now is there's a lot of young people, and I talk to a lot of young people from millennials down, that are just going, we're a little bit confused. Who's the captain of the ship here? Is there anyone really interested? You know, there's lots of good programs put on, and there's feel-good sort of sermons and stuff. But that model of the minister, a person in the conference looking after all the ministers, I think that'd be a vital thing to include, with keeping in mind of all the other little subcultural groups in there as well. There needs to be some shepherding going on in the Adventist Church to look after the people that fall through the cracks.
Yeah, it's a perennial issue, and it's so true. When Rick Rice wrote that book, he actually sent a draft copy to me, and I think he was playing with the title. Some of you have read it, and his title at the time was "Behaving, Believing, Belonging." Behaving, believing, belonging. And I was flying in a plane from the States back, and I was thinking, just invert that, reverse it. Belonging, believing, behaving. Now, why do I say that? He got a lot of flack for that, because Pete, my give is from growing up, and I'm not saying here that theology is not important. It's extremely important. But the way we understand our theology that sticks is in a healthy context where we can discuss it and we are socialized in. This is my words. We are socialized into an understanding of God and the divine. I don't know anyone in the last how many years has just sat down and read scripture that's my picture of God and no one else told me about it.
Yeah.
We're all structured that way. So when you sit down with people and you say, what's really important when you're a young kid? Oh, I remember Joe. I can't remember the sermon that said the Trinity, and that's very important. But I remember Joe that was the glue that helped me understand the Trinity a little bit later. You know what I'm saying? So I guess I'm speaking, we all know this, but where do I want to sit my energy? Just exactly as you've said, it's community. It's community, and the community is bleeding.
Yeah.
And it's just saying you get your theology straight is not the way out, because we have to experience our theology.
Yeah.
And when you experience it, you may come back to God and say, God, this may not be working for me at the moment. I have a lot of friends who don't fit into a straight Adventism, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Oh, I do know what you mean.
And Pete, on the one hand, I've got scripture here. There's another little red book over there. And I'm not being facetious, because I'm really and here I've got people that I'm standing with at dinner with my arms around saying, how you doing? Now, I want to let them see a picture of God. Yeah, I'm grappling with some of this stuff, but I will not let or tolerate myself to let the grapples to oversee the humanity that I want to be with. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah.
And to me, that is the struggle we have. I don't mind ambiguity at all. I do not want a church that can't tolerate it. But look, I don't want to sound negative with that, because I'm a part of it and I'm pushing for people to engage. And what you're doing here is engaging from different positions. I'm looking for emotionally healthy places. And I think, you talk about your journey and the kids and that, Pete, that's what we want to see, is emotionally healthy churches that are allowed to do this.
Yeah. Here's the irony. I have felt friendships, bonding, experience, connection, gospel, worship, but, and again, I'm not being a victim, I never felt community in Adventism. But here's the thing, I saw that your generation, a little bit older than me, almost having a camaraderie around the topic. The ministers, I'd long to be a part of that. Or I'd see at college there was a bunch of young Adventist ministers. We used to call them the basketball crew because they all seemed to love basketball, and they'd go off on holidays together, and they were, and there was a smaller group of us that bonded over surfing and music, and we liked cars, and but we weren't in any way organized. We just liked hanging out, and we would have our little bands, but we weren't a tribe. And I could see the little tribes all around, the college lecturers, that I wanted to be kind of a part of, because I felt like I had something to contribute, and I'd hear people saying great stuff, but we weren't even ushered into that.
Yeah.
We could almost hear them having great conversations down in the lecture theatre there, what is it, E17 or something, and we'd walk in and I could just feel like maybe that was a community and a tribe, but I wasn't really welcomed into it. Not because they were being mean. I think from a sociological perspective, and so I kind of really found my tribe elsewhere. My tribe became, the music nation kind of thing. And it was a secular community. And I would enjoy weekends having experiences and having friendships and bonding, but I was never really welcomed in. And here's the irony I was a long way about coming to. I've never felt community until the last few weeks with what we're doing here with SDAQ&A, where all of a sudden I feel welcomed into a group that was talking about this stuff and had camaraderie over it. And they were the ones telling me what to leave, but not including me. They were saying, don't leave, hang in there. They'd wheel me out to do something controversial and then say, good on you, hang in there. But they weren't welcoming me into that community. And so I created my own little band, literally traveling around, and very much enjoying fellowship, very much enjoying connections. But there's something organic happening even in this group, which is full of atheists, conservative people, liberal people, where for the first time in my life, I've felt community. Yeah.
And Pete, it's both psychological and sociological here. And at times it hits the theological. When I think about your contribution to a lot of people, so I think that the Yarra tribe. Now, that isn't a formal church community as such, but what's valuable about that is that you participated in the memories of events where people connect. What you're doing here is you're reconnecting in meaningful ways for the area that you need to find that community. And I think a lot of other people are doing that. And we may not have it as a church name, but in a sense, in a sociological sense, it's a community. It's a church community. Whatever you want to name it.
Because I had a sense of feeling that I belonged to the Yarra tribe, more as a collective of other people that were like me that didn't belong.
Right.
And so the community should be gathering around something that makes not a group of people that don't belong. And I guess the only reason I'm saying it is it's not in any way to say poor me. I've had the best life, and I've got a lot of living to go. It's just been wonderful. I'm not saying poor me at all, but I am noticing for the first time in my involvement with Adventists my whole life, a bunch of other people that don't feel like they quite belong anymore. And that's why I think what you're saying is so valuable, because it's really putting it into a frame, and it's actually bringing it into focus like I've never heard before, even though we've spent hours chatting in the car.
Yeah. Look, I think that, Pete, is because we've talked about restricted communities within an Adventist perspective. This is what the community looks like. This is how the community functions, and this is how the community will be, and this will be the way we have to judge it. Look, every organisation, every family has to have boundaries, no problems. Every organisation has to have boundaries. But there are some fundamental things as a movement grows that it's got to be really careful about. Someone said, let me find it, Pete. It's probably the last page here. Excuse me while I find it.
That's fine.
Hamill said, throughout the history of the Christian church, believers have found it difficult to accept this double-edged sword. True religion clings to the old that proves to be truth, but reaches out for new and more appropriate understandings. Hamill said that. Someone else said, when we evaluate a religious movement, it's not, we always look at what the institution has done well for us, but we haven't often evaluated what it's done the opposite to us. And I think that's a really significant conversation. I mean, I know we've moved from where we were with your point. And I'm thinking as you're talking, what is it for Pete with this community here that's creating a community, you know, the value of that?
Yeah. And I like someone's just written, Beck, Pete, you were part of my community when I was at college. And so thanks for saying that, Beck, because I'm definitely not saying I didn't feel included, and I felt like I was valued and I felt like I was able to contribute. I'm talking about the kind of community I think that a lot of people long for, where they can just be themselves in a small gathering and have camaraderie, which I would often have after gigs, and I'd chat to people like Beck after gigs, and I felt a huge sense of inclusiveness and a huge sense of feeling valued and that my life had meaning.
Yeah.
But there's a comradeship that I even would look across at the concerned brethren and think, boy, I wish I had that gathering around, you know, camaraderie. And my camaraderie was usually hanging around with people that said, boy, I wish we had that camaraderie, you know, and ironically would cluster together.
Yeah.
And ultimately, so I'm just highlighting, I'm not making this about me. I'm happy. I've felt valued. I've always felt valued. It's just an irony that I'm feeling comradeship in this organic kind of group where there's a whole lot of different people with different ideas and different opinions and perspectives. And I guess I'm asking you about that because
and what allows that
your
to
study,
happen,
because of your study.
What allows that to happen, Pete, is a community that can wobble enough, and this is threatening for a lot of people. Because when that community is defined totally, you've got to believe it totally this way. That puts massive restrictions on it, because the first question we'll ask is, do you think the same as I do? And so our adhesion to a community is simply on the basis you believe exactly. I heard someone say the other day, I cannot worship with you because you play that sort of music.
Yeah.
Not the best statement to say. Can we worship together and discuss that difference we have? That's a better way of going about it. So, Pete, a sectarian movement will have those constraints all the time, and that's the battle. So how we adhere to this and this, and so we get people cut out of that. What you're creating here is an opportunity for people to engage who not necessarily agree at all, but you can walk away and say, we're still community. Now, it seems superfluous, but wouldn't you love that to be, so someone will point, well, but Rick, at the end of the day, we've got to get down to the hard tax. You know, it's all about what we believe, and that's our total identity. You know, unless we're proper Adventists, and we will have no community. I would argue against that.
Because the proper Adventist, if you're not being a proper Adventist, the Lord won't return.
And I think that creates a fair few jitters. And folks out there listening, please understand me. You know, after ministry for 30-something years, it's not having a hit. It's some of the struggles I have. Is what is it that allows us to sit together in fellowship and hear each other and walk away with differences, but come back emotionally healthy and can continue to do it despite those differences? And Pete, we have struggled as a church ever since our inception with those sort of things. And if that happens at a hierarchical level and is mandated, you've got the creativeness against the forms and the structures. Boom, boom, boom. We've never done it that way. Can we try, you know, and on it goes. So you look for communities where you think that might happen. You know what usually happens? Sounds bad here. I'll go out and start another church.
Yeah.
Give it time. It'll go through the same organisational process.
Yeah.
So find the light that is still somewhere there and just keep with the people that keep that burning, that burns for you, that or burns for whoever.
Yeah.
It's not a negative thing for me. I think it's just the nature of humanity that we struggle with, in those forms and structures and the theology and all of those things put together. People, with Adventists, just be relaxed. Just be real. Just get in there and meet with people and be. And Pete, since we've moved, can I share this? Since we've moved into a new environment, we have no of our Adventist family folk anywhere around close by, and we're a part of communities. And please understand me, I'm not.
No, I get you.
It's quite the opposite. It's in a way, we have made so many friends now because of the music scene and the radio scene and this sort of thing. And I'm saying, Lord, what does one say? And the Lord keeps just coming back, be safe in me and just be. Now, that sounds like, you know, cliche stuff. But Pete, I'm trying to get it back to basic basic thoughts. Yeah. And you know what's really interesting is people will come and say, have you got a bit of time? I know you're thinking some stuff. Can we have a yarn about this? And I'm saying, I'm reevaluating what salt is, what leaven is. Pete, I'm not sure that that's going in the direction we want. Will we ever get to that stage as I guess, how do we handle it? I want it to be.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because we both would love to see these kind of advances for the benefit of the Adventist flock. When I was first starting my Facebook page now, it was very much a group that I wanted to focus on the positive things of Adventism. I was still an Adventist at that time. And I would gather together with what I called my think tank, you know, a handful of people that we would just chat at the local takeaway. And they would say, well, where do you want this to go? And what do you want this to be? And I said, we're already there. We're having lunch together and we're enjoying each other's company. To me, if that's as big as Now ever got, I'd be happy. And I kind of see, in some ways, my role here with SDAQ&A is more of a facilitator. I don't like the idea of leaders. I don't like the idea of a creed or that we should be gathering around. But what's happening inadvertently, not planned, organically, is that we are sitting around and hearing each other's stories. And there's a way greater sense of acceptance and non-judgment than I thought. When I was doing the podcast earlier, prior to this kind of new format where we're looking at a more controversial era, ironically, there is less flack and more healing and understanding and support because we're actually spending time listening to each other and sharing our stories. So I'd rather gather around people's stories and have lunch after than say, let's try and define a belief we all have to gather around.
It's through our story that we make the understanding. And I think we've lost the art of telling our stories a lot of the times, or we want to correct someone in their story. Pete, it would be interesting if this process that you're doing here, SDAQ&A, continued, and hopefully it will, just how it might navigate in terms of the sociological discussion.
Exactly.
You're going to be going, no.
Yeah, I didn't say that. Oh no, but in season 1, episode 13, you were talking and you said that.
Yeah. So I raised that question with Charles Teal, who just one of the Professor Charles Teal, sociologist at La Sierra, and he said, Rick, I don't think we'll ever get away from the paradox within an Adventist context. We've got to live and exist within the paradox. But he said, our maturity and health will be seen how we react and act through that process. And Pete, what I'm seeing in the church at the moment is a fair few of those things, and it's a pretty torn up sort of a whole world we live in, and people are reacting with fear and all sorts of processes. Let's not be pushed by that, but find a place where we can sit with each other. Pete, what I would love to see with your program is somewhere in there. I guess there may be people who have a totally different view than what we're expressing here, and to see. I wonder what their would we cater for that, and just how would we react to that?
In the podcasts before these online live ones happened, there was a even amount of both people presenting, but for some reason, as soon as we've gone visual with the video as well as the podcast, the people are going, no, this is more from a liberal perspective, so we don't want to engage. Okay. I've invited an equal amount of people from a more conservative realm to speak, and they won't. And I'm saying now, if you're watching and you think, great, Des Ford should have been kicked out, I want to hear your story. I'm not going to actually even try and say you're wrong. In fact, I'm more frustrated with liberals than I am with conservatives.
Let me just get a book.
Yeah. And while you're getting your book, can you still hear me back there?
Yeah, I've got it.
If this became the Emotionally Healthy Church, who's that by?
Oh, look, that's by Peter Cicero, but there's a number of books around it. But Pete, if folk, sorry for cutting you off, Pete.
No. I'm the one. I tend to do the cutting off. I apologise.
I think if people are really interested in this area, possibly we're speaking sociologically now. Probably the best book written in the last 5 decades is Bull and Lockhart's Seeking a Sanctuary. That is a sociological analysis primarily of the Adventist journey, seeking a sanctuary. But you've got books like this one. Sorry, mate, I'm back and forth.
No, it's good.
Look, The Silent Church by Žvaro Plantak. The Silent Church, Human Rights and Adventist Social Ethics. And Pearson's Millennial Dreams and Moral Dilemmas. But if people are interested, just message me and I'll send them stuff that they can read this stuff. But yeah, like I said, sociology is not the big guru by any means, but it's a way of helping people understand the processes that happen in the tangible experiences of humanity from a religious perspective.
Yeah, it's another chord in the song.
Exactly. Yep. And it could be a flat minor.
E7 sharp 9. The Jimi Hendrix chord.
Yeah.
And look, I'm interested in your thoughts sociologically on this little community that is growing up organically here. Because I'm going to be organising some programs where we're going to have guest speakers and music and things. And I'd like to even see down the track where we actually get together in the real world, not to create a church or a movement or anything.
That'll be the challenge.
Well, because what I would say to you, and I've just seen Tim Bircham come in, and I can see Andrew Skeggs there, and Anne Rowenfeld, and Brian Bridges just joined us. If nothing came of it, and I could still have a conversation with you, and with Tim and Anne and Andrew and Bruno's just joined. If I can still have that, then that's success to me. if we can still gather together for lunch, but at least us share our divergent views, that's a success. And in some ways, that kind of foolproofs some of the problems that could come from an official structure being set up. It's really more of a social gathering, but a community that has meaning and and values its people that it choose or choose not to be in it.
And the challenge will be, as we've talked about, to maintain that creativity without it being pushed into places that loses a sense of what you initially started it for. And that's where Adventism has found itself.
Yes.
But
and
look,
I think you can try and avoid that by limiting your expectations of it in a good way. Like literally, if it was all the dust settled and you and me were just having a strum on our guitars on the porch, having a banana thick shake and calling it SDAQ&A, that's enough for me. And if it only lasted for 6 months, that's enough for me.
Yeah.
Is it our expectations in systems that in the end kill us?
It's not just
expectations. Groups want to expand.
Yeah.
They want to have a centralized viewpoint. They want to spearhead their movement into mission fields and around the world.
Yeah. And Pete, that's the paradox again. There's the tension because go into all the world and preach the gospel. Now, when that is here, what a great idea. As soon as you concretize that and put it into actual structures, here we go. Okay, we need to get a boat to go there. We need to get people with licenses to go. So you look at Adventism now with medical, the medicalization of it. We need to, we were fine when we could operate as a movement within our sectarianism in terms, and again, I say that's not a negative term, it's just the way we express it. So, but while we had our health retreats, our hydrotherapy, I can remember the arguments when I was at the Sydney Adventist Hospital when the hydrotherapy unit was ceased, the water therapy, because people said, but that's what we've always done as a church. It was hydrotherapy. I'm just about finishing a book on
pillar.
Yes, in health reform, and some are crying that we've lost that. What's caused that? Well, we've been here a little longer than we thought. And whilst we're here, we now have to comply with a number of regulations, both educationally, medically. What's interesting is, theologically, no, we don't have to. So we can stay as a movement theologically and not stress too much about interference. So we as a movement have a religious liberty department to protect the edges of our religious liberty as a church. We don't need that necessarily medically or in terms of education because that's not threatened. We are governed by state regulations or Commonwealth regulations. So the Sydney Adventist Hospital has to abide by certain registration or they'll be deregistered. We can't operate. So back in the 19th century, when the state boards in America started we want doctors who haven't been trained for 3 weeks. We want them to go through a proper course. What was the option for Adventism? And Ellen White led in this. She said, we need to get people trained properly. So in other words, Pete, she understood that tension. Yeah. All along she was saying, don't lose who you are in the process, but you've got to live with that reality. I'm hearing from some people, let's go back to that days and you can't.
No.
And you can't go back and live that. So she traversed that dynamic. And by the turn of the 20th century, in the States particularly, most of the hospitals had to be fully registered, and so did their doctors and nurses. Now, what does that do? It limits your sectarianism. And that's when John Harvey Kellogg said, this will be a non-sectarian, the Battle Creek Sanitarium. It got the church up in arms. I know what he was saying, and he was sort of saying it quite different. I'm just about finished a book on it. Ellen White and John Harvey Kellogg, a little bit of tension.
Oh, I'd love to read that. Yeah. I've read some very interesting
over Adventist
literature.
Identity. Which way will the church go? Will it hold to a theological stance or more a medicalised stance? Hospital. So interesting little journey. But they're the tensions, and so I don't get up and go bang, bang, and I just think, what can we do as a community to allow ourselves to be lubricated enough to keep moving. But a sectarian movement by nature is hierarchical, and it flows through, and that's where the tensions come. That's just my give on it.
No, that's a very good insight. Very good. Very revealing, actually. Puts things into perspective. Ellen White kind of had these visions and created these dreams, thinking we're only going to have a few weeks anyway. But she then had a really good way of balancing the two also. So she'd create this kind of problem, but then she spent her time having to deal with it for her whole life.
And people don't realise that. And she understood those issues. You know, I've spent most of my adult life researching her works, and most people don't really. You know, she wrote so many letters to John Harvey Kellogg that she never sent to him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because he was like a son to her, and she
loved him. Yeah.
She agonised about this, but she understood the dilemma. And she tried to keep a purpose right through that, the great controversy theme, which wasn't original with her. It was Joseph Bates kicked that off, but she kept that rolling, and she understood those tensions quite severely. And what I found with my research is that it was John Harvey Kellogg often that came and put a scientific basis for the visions that she had. It's fascinating sort of discovery. Ellen was saying we need a scientific basis to undergird what I'm saying that's coming from, you know, from God. And there was this mixture going on. But Pete, I think, look, talking about Ellen, I just wish we had more time. What we need maybe sometime is just let's have a little get together, a group, sit down and just talk this stuff and discuss some of these issues again and broader. But one of the things
another topic for future too, because the
hermeneutics
place of view, we're going to do other topics.
Yeah, hermeneutics, revelation, and inspiration. Just incredible. You know, still a bit of a problem. What I see. You know, we've had, what do you do when your prophet dies? That was the big challenge one of the big challenges straight after Ellen White passed.
The 1919 conference.
We don't have the voice. We don't have the voice. And this little movement had to sort of make its way. Part of the problem we had was, let's keep her voice going. And we shared, now we have all her writings out there for everyone to see. But we made all these compilations. So anyone could just go and find a piece of information without knowing without contextualizing it. And I've sometimes seen in my ministry that creates immature Christians. We'll just pull it out of nowhere and use that as a statement that we need to have, rather than go and do the hard work. So I think that's a whole other discussion, Pete, that we could. How does a movement without its mother continue to traverse a postmodern environment?
Yeah. Well, let's do that.
No.
No, not right now. I mean, let's do that down the track.
No, we're going way over your time, but
with just to the political. So I'm drawing some parallels to the Neil Wilson era Glacier View, and the Ted Wilson era and the compliance document.
Yep.
The effect on what's about to happen next is pre-Glacier View again. And I guess I've been trying to say for a few years now, how do we head this off at the pass? And people have been saying, nah, it's fine, it's going to change, no. And then we see the no vote, then we see the compliance document have teeth, then we see the 6 warnings of the unions, and still people are going, it's going to be a no worries. So, not judging, but from a sociological perspective, when you've seen other systems hit these kind of similar walls, repeating themselves again, potentially we're about to see a whole bunch of Adventist ministers lose their jobs, get defrocked, the same thing again, young people getting hurt, families getting hurt. We're well and truly demonstrably along the path to that becoming a reality. You've seen other systems. Have they broken the cycle? Should we be concerned about what's just around the corner? What can we do to stave it off?
Yeah, Pete, that's 2 hours in itself.
Have you seen it before in other systems?
I haven't. Methodism tried different things and went off the road. Presbyterianism tried and then amalgamated into uniting and different things. Pete, I think I haven't. I have every movement that I've studied comes to a hit, and more so sectarian movements, because you have ways that monitor behaviour and structures are self-perpetuating, and they need to be in one way, but it's deadly in the other way, because it does not want to let the water spill over and re-evaluate. So it's containing. So in your preservation mode, which continues, it stops a lot of the times the abilities to push those boundaries further and be comfortable in that sort of space. Am I sounding pessimistic? I probably am, but only because I understand the processes a little bit more now.
You've just seen it happen, and you've not seen in your study a successful heading off at the pass.
Look, I'd love if Rob was out there, or someone, or Harry Ballas, or some of those guys, that, Pete, even if they were successful, what would happen in terms of longevity? And my give is they would come back into attention syndrome. So Stark and Bainbridge, the two great sociologies in the 1970s and 80s and early 90s, argued that what happens in a church is the tension rises, particularly sectarian movements, over a theological issue. Tension rises. You don't believe what we believe. You don't believe what we're going to separate.
Right.
That new movement will go and say, we're not going to have any creeds. We're not going to do anything. Give it 10 years, and it will build up those processes again. And have a guess what? Yeah. Another movement will start. It'll happen.
And one thing that has been both good and bad with Adventism is that it hasn't splintered. That can be seen as good, because it's bad in the sense that if they do, they're going to have the exact same problems. The thing to keep in mind is, if I'm correct, and I think you've said that the analysis is there to say I'm correct, this is happening again now. It happened at Glacier View. It's happened in Adventist history. All groups come to this point. I don't think the church is going to split. From my conversations with liberal pastors and yourself and more progressives, they're not leaving. They're saying, no, I'm not going to go. I'm sticking around. So I don't think it's going to split. I think there's going to be splinter groups going off and people doing little things and people just leaving. But, and maybe I'm being idealistic, but wouldn't it be great if there was something? Because the only reason I'm really involved still with Adventist kind of dialogue, apart from the friendships and the nice lunches and having wonderful bonds with people over the years, that will never change. But from a more political, theological, conversational reason, is because I don't want to see Glacier View happen again. And is there any, and we're, like we said, what influence do we have? We're just, people living in a small part of Australia having a chat on Facebook. But from a sociological perspective, and you're kind of saying you've never seen it, so you haven't seen it happen, but if you were to advise a group and say, look, instead of history repeating, why don't you try this? Is there any advice you would give?
Oh man.
Because it's demonstrably happening, whether people tell me it's not or it's going to be okay and surely this won't happen.
Yeah.
We're headed towards a massive schism where people are going to get hurt emotionally, physically, jobs are going to be lost. Union leaders are going to come to pastors and say, look, you cannot be supporting gay rights. You cannot be preaching from the pulpit about women's ordination. You've got to tone that down. And they now say, oh, well, nothing's going to stop me. You start seeing your job getting kicked out, you're losing your job. That's going to start having some ramifications.
Yeah. And Pete, it's the heart of a sectarian nature.
Yeah. And I'm not being negative. I'm saying what can we do? What can we do?
Yeah. That is a really good question. What can you do without losing your sanity and soul and go, it's almost like this. Will it change? Some would see it divinely won't change because that's what it's meant to be. It's meant to be that structure.
To shake out the people and splinter and
the views are varied. I can remember back in Glacier, we talked about the 1980s. I can remember hearing it very clearly. I didn't understand fully the ramifications of it until some years later when people said, we knew the bad lights would go out. Oh, like Des, we knew, what Eloy talked about in the last days. And I later on grieved about that because what people are saying is, I'm okay. I didn't do it.
Yeah.
They're the ones that did it. And Pete, I'm looking for a healthy church. And I know it's sort of going around and around. The structures frustrate me. The way I survive in it is because what do we do? Do we go and shoot them? Do we go and shoot people? You're right. How does a movement change order? Well, it has a process of sort of democracy where you vote in, vote out. But I know from certain movements that those power plays and those representations can be very much manipulated. I'm not going into conspiracy theories, but you know how that sort of functions. And that's the way I see it evolving in the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years is a new Adventism rises up. The old Adventism is getting a little bit secular. We've got to keep the right people in and that momentum keeps going that way.
Because people, when I remember in the 80s, were saying, "Oh, don't worry, these CBs, they'll all die out, and we'll be able to create the church we want." And I remember thinking, "Hang on, there's a whole bunch of young people going up to Vanuatu and appropriating the name Adventist in a slightly different way and starting new churches, and they're very conservative." And they had a huge influence on young people. And at every 10 years, there's a vibrant young conservative Adventist movement. Good on them, but there's also a vibrant liberal one. But they just fight all the time.
Yep. And it's usually
ignorant to the history.
It's a theological position that's usually fought over, but the fallout is in the human side of things. And I think Harry talked about all that. And I think what you're talking about with the this new documentation and the examination, inquisitions, etc. We'll go through that process again. And there'll be some who feel that's very justified. There'll be others who are saying, what are we doing? What is stronger?
And both seem powerless.
Yeah.
Those that go, yep, good, this is happening, soon will, if history repeats again, they'll be not in power and a more liberal group will be in power, and then that'll cycle back around again. And the liberals who go, oh, this is terrible, this is sad, because of no sense of sociology or history, they don't realise. And you can be sad, or you can be happy, you can have hope, but there's not a lot of action going on, I see. From a sociological perspective of other systems, does that repeat itself as well? The more conservative ones become organised, monetised, focused, and the more liberals, because of their nature of, hey, easy come, we're happy to accept people, tend to lose their power? Is that something you've seen in other systems?
Oh, look, in these sort of sectarian movements, certainly.
Because you're sort of saying that you're analysing sectarian systems, not so much systems.
Oh, look, leadership by nature wants to self-perpetuate, keep the momentum going in whatever shape or form. You do not want to be opening too many gates,
right?
Because you have the system worked out and how that's going to function.
Right.
And so you want people in there who are going to continue that. Now, this is not derogatory about a person. It's the nature of the system that it needs to self-perpetuate.
Right.
And keep controlling that history.
Yeah.
So what often happens is the creative spirits, the creative people, they will either have to make a conscious decision to, I'm out of here because this is just not going to work at all. or they will find other avenues within the body to be able to function. And I have a lot of friends who says, Rick, I've been socialised into this movement. It's part of my family. What do I do with that? I can't cut that off, but I don't want to cut that off, but I can't tolerate the other side.
Mm.
And they're sort of saying, which way's up the most? This is what I'm seeing. And a lot of people, so they're going quiet on one side and vocal on the other, just to create some meaning and equilibrium for themselves.
And when it was in a system where unions had more power, that was fine. We could find our own little pockets and our little bands to operate our own quirky, creative kind of approaches to Adventism.
Well,
Ellen was the one that brought that into play. What wisdom that is now being totally discounted from the top, trying to take away that.
It's sort of gone back the opposite way.
Yeah.
And Barry Oliver and Mustard did their doctoral work in that area, the reorganisation. And you're right, Pete. Here's the protection. And if it's a divine mandate that is perceived to be a divine mandate, that this is the way it's got to be, and they're human, and I pray for all of these people, but I know how the structure. I said to a president one time, I said, who was elected, I said, knowing you do about organisational theory, and you're going to be a president, how are you going to cope? And the person said to me, it's my greatest fear. I will lose myself. I will lose myself in the process.
How did they cope, looking back?
Well, on one hand, but on another, almost fighting against the goads, because they understood the process, but to maintain another process, they had to let go of something. And it was often they regained themselves after they. Now, that's not everyone. Some people can navigate those spaces really easily. A lot of other people have said, I'm not tolerating this, I'm gone. I think a lot of people are becoming muted and saying the family's big enough for me to stay with, but I've just got to put that other stuff aside. And Pete, where I see you, no, we've got to speak to all those issues. And I think you're right.
Are women and children the most damaged and at threat by these kind of sectarian sociological loops?
It's really interesting that within Adventism, they are numerically our largest members, the women. And yet, that's bad, Pete. That's another area, isn't it? Patriarchalism and all of that sort of stuff. But they have the least voice in a real sense, maybe not in China. And that is a cultural just bang to a theology, what's happening in China. But marginalised, and the argument would be for pure theological reasons. I'm not so sure at all. I'm sure it's not those reasons at all. But that's where the rubber and road start hitting again. The theology becomes the bulwark of discussion, and by nature, the creed becomes the way we throw them out or keep them in. What do you do with that? George Storrs said, never let's get another one, because we were judged by the Millerite Creed. We will never get that again. But hey, up went the creeds. Yeah. Now, I don't have a problem with us saying this is who we are. We believe this, and this. But we've had situations where people have been martyred because of that. When does a creed become more than a creed?
I fear for the progress that has been made for women in the Adventist Church and for the gay community. I feel that there was a lot of progress made in the last 30, 40 years for the gay Adventist community. I fear for them as we approach what I think is another Glacier View.
Yeah, and that, Pete, what I'd love people to be able to do, we had that discussion just a little bit earlier about friends, very close friends who put your arm around and say, how does all this work? This is where we are. I've got my theology here. Can you see my hand? I've got my theology here. I've got my arm around here. This is not sloppy stuff. This is human stuff here.
Yeah.
And I'm going, God, how do I put those two together? And I'm saying, Rick, in my understanding, my importance in life is to love those people, and not just, these trite comments I hear, oh, we love the sinner, we hate the, yeah, come on, please. Hey, here's where the mentoring is, Pete. If I can be friends with those friends of mine, and there comes a time when they want to ask a question, I want them to be able to come to me and say, what do you think, Rick, from your perspective? They don't need to, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If I cut them out, Pete, they're never going to come to me. And this is a dilemma for the church. So look, I'm being really open on this. Let God be the one that deals with the heart of people, wherever they are and whatever the issue is. Just you and I be there with them. And if that means we need to remodel and refashion how we think, that's the first part of the process for me.
Yeah, we can.
Now,
I'll
get shot down now. Maybe it's good I retired.
Well, all you're saying is that we can only be love manifested. If God is love, we're the only ones that can manifest that on earth in a sense of helping our brothers and sisters.
Yeah, I went one time. I was over in the States, in Nashville, doing one of my recordings, and where the Nashville Predators, that's the ice hockey team, play their big games. It's a multi-purpose centre. They have church services there. They have hockey games there. They have massive. James Taylor was having a concert there the weekend I was there. And I'm standing on the side of the street, the main street where they have all the music, and these guys, Christians, wearing sandwich boards on their body, screaming at the Christians on the other side of the road that they were going to hell. And I walked up to one and I said, what's going on? They're going to hell because they're gay and they don't play the music that we do. And same old story. And I walked to, so people will say, well, you've got to stand for something or you'll fall for everything. We need to think about what our community really means and what our identity really means. And I think we've lost a part of our soul because our theology has been so constrictive that we've allowed it to outplay and push people away. I would rather say I'll hold that intention because I don't fully understand it, but I'm going to love, and it's going to be meaningful and experiential love. And Peter, it's not just puffy little, puffy little stuff.
No, you're not being cliche.
It's when people come back and say, I've struggled with these problems and you're willing to hear some of our struggles. I'm thinking to myself, that's a God space for me. The other option is to put a sandwich board and say, just get out of my life because you don't have it together theologically. I can't do that anymore. No. Where the church will say, we've got to have a theology as correct as this.
Love is a verb.
Let's talk our theology. I'm not downgrading that. Let's get in there and fight for that stuff.
Yeah.
But let's not lose our humanness and defrock people because they think a little bit differently. How big are we? We? And so the big challenge is, and I saw this in Questions on Doctrine, one of the issues is, and Pearson, the great General Conference president from years ago, we are not another church. We are the only church, and we will remain sectarian. Well, folks, let's be honest. The horse is bolted. We are not, in a sense, fully sectarian. We are down in this earth pretty strongly. So let's talk about some of those things as much as we do some of these other things. That's my plea. Good conversations like here. Let's get it out there and get it going. I don't know. I've said too much.
Mate, I think that's a good point to leave this conversation on. But there's two things that have really struck me, and one of them is that, wow, this has been a valuable conversation, and I'd highly recommend that people, listen to this one and the one we had with Bob Wolfgram, because it kind of helps you understand the setting. Like you say, it's not the answer, but when you look at things from a sociological perspective, the predictable nature, the predictable occurrences of our humanness and our human nature unfolding, it just helps put things in perspective. So I really thank you very much for sharing today. And you were also echoing what Pastor John Den was saying the other night about identity is the issue. We need to establish that.
Yeah.
And, maybe we haven't come up with some answers, but we certainly highlighted the fact that that love really, it's not a cliche. It's something that we've got to really hold, love and kindness and all the beautiful little gems of teachings that Christ put slotted into the Gospels there, that
Yeah.
those who wrote it were able to remember.
And Pete, I think for me, the thing that changed my experience was that one sentence by Teal. We are not just what we articulate, we are what we incarnate.
Yeah, yeah.
What we say and what we do can be quite at loggerheads with each other.
Mm.
And I've got a sense that God's really interested in this hand. He wants both.
Yeah.
But that's where I come down at. And like I said, Pete, if folks are interested, I'm happy to just share some resources with people if they want to read in these areas.
Yeah.
If they just message me, I'm on, just message me.
Well, as I've said in previous interviews, the good thing about this platform, unfortunately, those listening to the podcast can only do that if they join the group here. But these conversations will remain on the wall, and people can literally write to you. It was really great seeing. It's been great seeing all the conversations. They've all had over 300 comments where people are interacting, and this conversation will be able to be continued in the comments below.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get you back when we do other series on the program to kind of reflect on the topics that we're talking about occasionally, as well as series come to an end or begin, just to give a bit of a unique perspective there. I think that'll be very valuable. So, Pastor Dr. Richard the First Ferrét, been good chatting to you today. And
it's time to catch up with the music, I think.
Yeah, it's time to have a jam.
Yeah.
And what's good is we can put all those things into tension. We can have these discussions, but boy, you and I enjoy having a jam and having some jam on toast as well.
Well, Pete, I think your final comment there is very, very significant about healthy families can relate.
Exactly.
We might even write a song about it, eh?
And those that are watching, just a quick, you'll see this is part 2. We had my Wi-Fi collapsed in the middle of at the end of the first hour, so I hope it's still up there on the wall. I'll go and check now, but I encourage.
And we'll leave it there. What an interesting conversation. As I watch, we're back in 2025 now, those listening on the podcast. And that was our interview with Dr. Rick Ferrét from 2020, part of our Season 2 series on Des Ford and Glacier View. We didn't get to talk much about Des Ford and Glacier View, but if you listen to what was said, you'll realise that from a sociological perspective, you can predict these kind of events occurring again and again within Adventism and other systems, and you can see and understand why it happened as well. I'd love your thoughts in the comments on Rick's presentation there. I really enjoyed it. When I watch these, I see how far I've come in my understanding of things. A lot of stuff was formulating back then, and a lot of the things I haven't changed my views on. There's a lot of, I guess, just I have a richer, happier life in many ways because of this group and meeting all you guys and chatting to these very, very interesting people. Now, because we had some issues with Facebook, I am going to, excuse me, go live again in about half an hour. And sometimes in the afternoon, I do go live, my afternoon, because a lot of our friends in Europe and UK don't get to see the live shows. So I'm thinking of doing another Glacier View series this one is episode 19, season 2, with Lowell Tarling. And some of you might want to stick around. It'll be about half an hour. I'm going to get that going, and I'm going to try and work out what went wrong with Facebook. We didn't go live to Facebook today. So anyway, we'll work that out. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I will look forward to reading more of your comments. And yeah, let's hang in there and focus on common ground and not worry too much about the rest of it. But I don't think people need Ellen White, do they? Okay, chat soon.